The parable of the wedding banquet. This is Matthew 22, verse 1 through 14. And Jesus spoke to them and saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused. Then he sent more servants and said, 'Tell those who have been invited that I've prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention and went off. One to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burnt their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. Go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there was not wearing wedding clothes. 'Friend,' he asked, 'how did you get in here without wedding clothes?' The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendant, 'Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" I wanted to share a couple of perspectives about that and being as simple and clear as possible. The first thing is that the kingdom of heaven is not focused on the human spirit, but is focused on his son. We are guests, both on earth and in the kingdom of heaven. We are invited to participate in the eternal activity that is administered and directed by his son. So we are not the focus. So that mentality automatically encourages humility. And then it says he sent his servants to those who had been invited. So the kingdom of heaven is somewhere else. And where we are cannot become the kingdom of heaven. So in order to experience this kingdom of heaven, we have to travel there. So we have to go to the wedding banquet. The wedding banquet is not going to come to us. Now that implies both geographical distance and concepts. In other words, where we live, both on this earth, as well as the concepts we have and how our inner life is remote from the divine will and also the kingdom of heaven. That in order to experience it, we have to inwardly change and then also move towards there. But how do we do that? He said he sent his servants to those who had been invited. So he sent prophets, called ones, and finally his son to give us an invitation. That is to show us how to travel to the wedding banquet in order to get there. How we must adjust ourselves. What we need to do to prepare ourselves in order to get there and experience it. Everything was ready. But then it said they paid no attention and went off. One to his field, another to his business, and the rest seized his servants. Now this divides humanity into two groups. Right. So it's important for us to see that. Whenever I say humanity, I mean all of us, everyone listening to this. We fall into one of these two groups. So one group said, paid no attention and went off, focusing on business. So that's us focusing on family, focusing on earthly pleasures, focusing on comfort, focused on all earthly pursuits. And we always have one excuse or another why we cannot take seriously the pursuit of spiritual recognition. No matter what it is. And we have other priorities. All this is secondary. So we're not paying heed to it. We pursue the worship of our gods, whether that comes in the form of earthly pursuits, earthly pleasures, or just marked selfishness in different areas, or other interests that we place above this. So that's one group. The other group says the rest seized his servants and mistreated them. And if you look at the history of persecutions of prophets and called ones and finally the Son of God, whenever you have existing power structures, religions in different ways, they want to uphold the intellectual institutions and they see the Enlightenment as upsetting the current structures. So they're naturally be involved in the persecution of new enlightenment. This involves not only institutions, but individuals, whereby individuals cling to what they have learned, believers merely out of habit, and when new enlightenment comes, they reject it. So that's another group, seized the servants, mistreated them, and killed them. That's the two groups that humanity falls under, those who persecute and reject the new enlightenment in truth because it doesn't conform to existing dogmas, or those who completely just disregard it and pursue personal interests and earthly pursuits. But then and this also, the mission of the Son of God falls into this category as well. It says, how did the king react? So how did the king, the Almighty, feel about how we treated his servants, persecuting and killing them, right? It says he sent his army and destroyed the murderers and burned. So in other words, the Almighty does not consider persecution or killing of his son or any of his envoys or prophets that he sends as any act of redemption. He considers that as violation of his will, and the reciprocal effect of that is destruction. That is, the law of sowing and reaping. When you sow weeds, you will reap weeds. When you sow apples, you reap apples. So you sow hostility against the Almighty's will, and what we reap is hostility for ourselves. It's really as simple as that. And this destruction is a picture about the judgments that will fall on us, that we will experience on ourselves what we put through others. This is pretty clear about the action of persecuting any of his envoys or prophets or called ones. And then he said to his servants, the wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited do not deserve to come. Go to the streets and invite to the banquet anyone you find. So the servants went out and gathered anyone that they could find, both good and bad. Whenever you see, we are given opportunities. And when we fail to use those opportunities, somebody else will then be given. The idea that many are called, but few are chosen. And that the kingdom of heaven will go on with or without us. And that if people who are so privileged to be near the truth do not use it aright, then those who are standing behind them, who have a more humble attitude, will be called forward to enjoy the harvest. So our invitation will be given to someone else who is more humble. And if you see how this was exemplified by the thief on the cross, a lot of people rejecting Jesus, but the thief on the cross humbled himself. And then what did Jesus do? Extended an invitation to him, to his Father's kingdom. So it's not a question of how sinful somebody has been or how good and bad they are. Any with a humble heart, look upwards, will be given the opportunity if they're earnest enough and willing to follow the path. And then there's this other one that says, but the king came in to see his guests and noticed a man there not wearing the wedding clothes. And he said, how did you get in without the wedding clothes? The man was speechless, and he said the king told his attendants, tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. How are we to conceptualize this in daily life? So this means that this person was not attired. So this implies that in order to enter this kingdom of heaven, we have to wear the dress code. And this implies that we have to be attired in conformity to the divine will. This implies how we think, how we act, how we desire. And then if anything is off, even the smallest thing, then we'll be cast out. This means that we have to completely change in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, but not that the kingdom of heaven will come to us or will change to accommodate us. It's really as simple as that. That's what a dress code is a form of conduct and living. In this judgment process, anything that does not fit within the code of the kingdom of heaven will dissolve and will be destroyed step by step. And that it means that for us, we have to fully change ourselves inwardly and outwardly in order for us to gain admittance and last. And then even the smallest things that we try to cling to will be recognized and noticed by the Almighty, and will be put through experiences that will compel us to release ourselves from it, or would have to dissolve with it. So this is just a full picture then of how many are called and if you are chosen. Many are invited, but if you take up the invitation by adjusting themselves and preparing themselves for it, and living their lives in readiness for it. So once we receive the invitation, which means become aware of truth, it's then, okay, everything should adjust to the day of the wedding, should adjust to the kingdom of heaven. That is, how do I adjust my whole life and orient it towards this high goal, which means I save my money and use it to buy the clothes that's needed for the wedding banquet, right? So in other words, we use the energy of the day in order to build a life that would allow us to tread the path toward luminous heights. Everything is adjusted to that. If we don't do that, then we see from the parable that the consequence can only be ascent or destruction. So it's quite clear and it's quite comprehensive and it's quite simple. And so for us is whether we choose to accept it. And we have to change our clothes, which means change our ways. So this is just some thoughts I have regarding this. So I just wanted to share that. And this is Ikenna Azala, and I hope this is of benefit to you. And again, this is just my interpretation of this simple parable. Each person will have to exert themselves to clarify it for themselves and accept what only rings in their intuition is true. Have a nice day.